but it's the ability to bring those voters with you.
It's complicated and you don't need to worry about it.
It's been very well canvassed that as a party, we don't think the way that Darlene acted was in line with our values and principles.
I really had to think about, how am I going to change things up? How am I going to get through this? Because I don't want to fail.
It is foul and personal and violent.
Job is to make sure that we are showing New Zealanders that there is an alternative to the divisive approach of this government, that you can bring people together.
I mean, I think one of the things that any government of whatever stripe has to realise that every minister has to be a climate minister now.
When you've got a country that's got a young population but they don't get involved, you might want to have a grown-up chat about that.
We don't want a situation where government dictates the local government, but you want to make sure the system is set up so that it's easy for communities to make decisions.
I'd be really interested to see if the officials that advise that a Crown Observer was necessary or should be put in place, or whether he's made that judgment call himself.
I don't think we did, and I've said this, I don't think, because it happened quite quickly last time, I don't know that we did a good enough job of bringing the public with us.
Remember, just by having Maori Wolves doesn't guarantee that mana whenua are going to be represented around the table.
Suggests that whānau with a disability and those who care and support them are somehow grifters.
Hello there. Good evening. Kia ora. How is everyone tonight?
I'm doing okay. I was reading Chris Bishop moaning about Judaism before we came on here.
Yeah, it's been a hectic week. There's been a lot going on, and I noticed when I was doing the news up today, I couldn't get to all of everything. Like, there's just so much, and then there was stuff that happened while I was out and about at the protest as well. Speaking of the protest, we're going to bring Georgie in. If people have questions for Georgie, who organised the Kirikiriroa branch of today's protest, please feel free to plonk them in the comments. They'll pop up here on screen, and we'll ask her as we go. But we've got a really tough question to start off with for her. So let us bring in Georgie Dansey from Hamilton. We'll have a chat to her about today's protest. Kia ora, Georgie.
Kia ora. Nice to see you. How's it going?
Yeah, I'm finally dry after today.
Me too. It took a while. It was a wet, wild one. My backyard is slightly flooded at the moment because we got major downpours just after I got home, and we've got floods at our local Pack and Save. And oh, mate.
Yeah, pretty wet here. But good day to go and stand out and yell at politicians.
That's right. Always a good day to do that.
Yeah, exactly. So tell me, how did it come together for you in Kirikiriroa? Because you had, 2 days to sort this all out?
Yeah. So I think I was so overwhelmed with how many people turned up today. We had almost 300. It was really incredible. So yeah, kind of when the announcement was made, it was like Wednesday when we made the decision, the CTU made the decision to put these rallies on. And so we quickly figured out where we were going to do the one in Kirikiriroa. And that was Wednesday night. I was making the design on Canva to chuck it up. And so I think it really showed, especially with the rain, just how much people care about this issue and the huge impact that the changes to pay equity are going to have on our communities.
I'm going to throw a question to you that's a bit tough on this one, because you mentioned pay equity. Tonight, the National Party MPs are in crisis PR mode. I know Chris Bishop has put stuff up on his page. I know my local MP, Dan Videos, has put stuff up on his page, word for word saying the same thing, all trying to point out that equal pay is not being scrapped. So I'm wondering if you could give us an explanation as to what the difference is between equal pay and equitable pay, since it's the Equitable Pay Act that's being played around with.
Yeah, nice. Great. That's a really good question. Well, it's in those two words, equal and equity. And equal and equity have different meanings. I think the best way to describe it is that graphic that you've probably seen, which is there's 3 people and they're trying to look... Nice. They're trying to look over the fence. That middle one and that short one are not going to be able to see out over the fence unless they have extra support. So one of them's got 2 boxes, one of them's got 1. equality and equal mean everyone gets the same no matter who they are, and equity means people get different things depending on their needs.
What has been the feedback that you've had on the ground so far from people around this change?
Shock and devastation has been just what's been rolling through everybody I speak to. The fact that it all happened so quickly, and it went through urgency, there was no opportunity for public consultation or anyone to give their view on it, and the size of the changes. They're not tinkering around the edges, and that's why the Facebook post from Dan Bidwell you just showed is so misleading, because yes, the Equal Pay Act is still going to exist, but it's existing in a form that is just going to make it absolutely impossible for anyone to make any progress in pay equity. So just the huge shock of the impact. Some of the claims that they're scrapping, right? There's 33 claims that are in the system right now being processed. Some of them have been in there since 2017. This is unions and communities working on these claims, because it's a huge amount of work. Like, it's all so much maths and bits and pieces, which it needs to be, because we need to make sure it's a thorough process that's robust. But it's so much work that it can take years. I mean, ideally it would be shorter, but that's the system we've got. And then they're just turning around and saying, okay, sorry, that's gone. You'd have to put in a new claim in order to start that again. And I think people were just so gutted.
I was talking to a librarian today that works up here in Tamaki Makaurau. She pointed out that they were expecting to get into the very final stages of the entire process on Thursday next week, and it's just been pulled out from under them. Obviously a state of shock for them. Having a look through the list, because there's 33 of these different places, different areas that have had the rug pulled out from under them. Is it worth $17 billion for our budget?
I think the thing there is that we are in a cost of living crisis. It's ridiculously expensive to live in this country right now. That's the biggest issue that is facing New Zealanders. The government has said since before they were elected, hey, we're going to sort out the cost of living. So in order to sort out the cost of living, then paying our lowest paid workers more so that they can live is exactly where we need to put the money. So if taking that money away from them, where is a better place for it to go? There just isn't. It's just doesn't make any sense to me. The fact that the tax cuts they are making, the places they're putting the money is places like the tax cuts for landlords and the huge tobacco companies away from pay equity is just diabolical and heartbreaking.
Question that's coming from Sam here, it's in the ballot. Do you think the reason for ending urgency were to not use the excuse that they were stuck in Parliament? That popped up the other day, because they finished, they cancelled sitting under urgency on, it must have been Thursday night.
What do you mean? Sorry, I don't get what you mean.
So this bill, or the raft of bills that came through Parliament during the week, because everything under urgency, because they've got to get it locked down by today for it to be signed off for the budget. So urgency was pushed through for a lot of them, and filibustering from the opposition kept a lot of them going longer than they thought. I think what Sam is talking to here is the fact that on Thursday night they cancelled urgency and basically said, no, we're not talking about this anymore, and go home. I think what he's asking here is, do you think that was so that they could basically say, no, we're not going to be stuck in Parliament talking to this?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I really don't know. I don't know.
Very fair.
Sorry, Sam.
No,
don't know.
Yeah.
Ask an MP.
See, honesty. It's great. Blake, have you got any questions?
So I was thinking, there was one everywhere. So we had Auckland, where Paul was. We had Hamilton, where you were. we had a very late announcement, which I didn't get to, with Mr. Bishop having one outside his office, but instead of going, he was on Facebook complaining again about Judaism not being on the media for some weird reason. So was it heartening to see, or like, this is more for you, Paul, and if anyone turned up for you, was it heartening seeing all the MPs turning up?
Yeah.
Yeah. What MPs did you have show up at your end?
In Kirikiriroa.
Hmm.
We didn't have any MPs, unfortunately. No. Did you get lots?
We did, but
parties?
it's Auckland. So we had Carmel and Priyanka, I know, were there. A little bit later in the show, we've got a quick interview with Ricardo and Chloe from the Greens. Marama was there as well. So yeah, a lot of politicians showed up today. The one that didn't show up was actually the one whose office everyone went to visit. She was nowhere to be seen.
There was a sign on the door at Tamapotaka's office that said, all of the staff are at a community hui today and they won't be back until 2:30. So, and everything was closed up. So I think that was purposeful. I mean, but it makes sense that the staff don't need to. We don't want to talk to the staff. We want to talk to the MPs.
Yeah. Well, the staff have got a job of passing things on, but they're still answerable to those MPs. Have you had any feedback from? I know Hamilton City Council has at least one group that's in that list of 33. Have you had any feedback from the local elected representatives there about this change?
Yeah, and we had a couple to come along to our protest. Louise Hart and Maxine Van Oosten were there, and Louise spoke about that Liberian pay equity claim that was in process and how gutting it was, because that was kind of a council-led initiative, and how gutting it was to get that one canned.
Now, we have a poll running as well at the moment in the chat on YouTube. Is this the bullet that the coalition has shot themselves in the foot with for the next election?
I hope so. We've had a series of cuts, and they've all been terrible. This one has just been next level. And I think when the amount of people affected by this, I spoke about the turnout, and you said you had that incredible turnout in Tamaki Makaurau today. The amount of people affected, you're pissing off a lot of women and a lot of women allies in this case. And I think this will be a time that when they lose the next election, they'll look back on this day and this week and think that was a mistake.
Yeah. But it's also quite interesting that, not surprising, that the taxpayer union is still holding on to the national lead, although they're giving Christopher Hipkins quite a big boost. So I guess that's something.
Yeah, it'll be interesting, won't it, to see the polls in the next couple of weeks and what the real impact that this announcement has had.
Yeah.
With that poll, it should also be pointed out it was done by Curia, who are no longer a member of the regulation board for polling in the country, because they were asking misleading questions. And that polling period was before this week, before everything that happened. Not that the media will tell you that, because they just ran it like, oh, here's a new poll. Oh my God, what a shock. Going into the next 18 months, I actually heard a comment today from Chloe. She turned around and said, as far as they're concerned, the election campaign for next year started on Tuesday. Going into the next sort of 18 months or so, how do you think that these kind of rushed changes are going to be seen and understood by the public, or is the government going to try and downplay them and try and encourage people to look elsewhere?
Yeah, I think the real risk is that they're making all these horrific cuts now, and then in that last year of government, when they get into campaigning mode, they're going to start making promises to people, and people are going to go, oh, great, a tax cut. and National will be able to hold their vote. The other concern is that National will shift their focus to put the blame for these huge cuts and these undemocratic processes to their coalition partners, New Zealand First and ACT, in order to hold their majority. And I think our job is really to keep pushing and reminding that this government is not in favour of the general public, not in favour of workers, women, and instead they would prefer to give money to the wealthy. And I think we need to keep pushing that and make sure that events like today keep happening and we keep keeping it at top of people's minds for when they go into voting.
Rochelle has actually just got a fantastic suggestion that she's made on the Facebook page. Showing up to every meet and greet with local national MPs, holding signs up and asking why women should earn less than men. Think this is a good strategy?
I think this is a great strategy. I think emailing your local MP, emailing all the MPs, booking appointments with your MPs, signing petitions, turning up at events, all of these things, just like what Rochelle's talking about, is going to be the thing that can really change it, because our communities don't have all of the money. The information about donations came out last week that National are topping the amount of donations they get, but what we do have is people power, and if we can get people out hitting the streets and making their voices heard, then we can change this government.
Any more plans for any action like this, or is it just a let's see what they fuck around with next time? And then
We've got a big one in Wellington on Budget Day, a big pay equity rally in Wellington. Wellington didn't do a massive one. I think they just did that one outside Chris Bishop's, but not a massive one today. So that's in a couple of weeks. And actually, I've already had messages from people saying, I missed today, when's the next one? So I don't think people want to do it. People want to get out. People want to show their distaste in what this government's doing. So I think, although nothing's planned right now, if we can whip up a protest in 2 days that gets 300 people up, at any point a protest could erupt.
I would like to see more protests, actually.
Yeah, would you? Yeah.
I'd like to see more protests about Seymour personally.
Yeah. So going forward, what are you planning to do in your role, keeping to advocate for this? Because technically, you're only 1 seat away from Parliament.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So at the beginning you introduced me as someone that worked for the Public Service Association. I don't. I work for ETU.
My apologies.
But it's okay.
All I do today is PSA everywhere.
Either way, I used to work for the PSA, so that's it. But either way, I'm union hard, so you got that right. That's fine. Yes. So the CTU, you may have seen, has a campaign, Fight Back Together, Maranga Aki, and so that's a kind of union-led one where we've had a couple of events. We had one last week at the Rose Gardens, and that I think is going to ramp up going into the election, where unions really try to pull together their people and communities to vote and make a difference. The other thing, actually, while we're on that, is that work on getting out the vote for our local government elections this year, as well as voting on that Māori ward referendum. If we can get out our vote for the Māori ward referendum, then we can retain Māori wards, but it's just getting that vote out. So there's a lot of work to do between now and October to make sure people are engaged in that kaupapa, know the importance of voting for local government, and get out and vote. We need progressive. We need a progressive government. We also need progressive people around the council table.
Oh, talk on that one. Have you noticed with this kind of action that's happening over the last few days, and obviously the local elections on the horizon, 5 months away from now, people starting to go, right, how can I use my vote better to make change?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people have come out of the woodwork offering to help. Not necessarily how they can vote. I think we're a little bit far away from that, but I have kind of got more kind of messages and had more conversations with people in the last few months about them wanting to come and help than I have ever before. Even during an election process, a general election process, people have come along, but not in the intensity they're coming now, and especially young people approaching me and saying, hey, I want to be involved, what can I do? So that kind of building of activists has been really positive.
Blake, any questions?
So we see you, as I say, we see you doing all of this. Again, you could be called up to Parliament anytime. So how do you balance that, thinking, okay, I'm next on the list now, so how do we get ready for that and keep pushing this and mix that all together?
God, what a question. I don't know. I don't know what Parliament's like, so I don't know how to prepare for it. It's a funny space to be, being next on the list. You know, the person who just went in, Vanushi Walters, she didn't get very much time. You know, she's got the call, hey, you're in, and then your whole life changes. So I just carry on doing my mahi. I'm fortunate to have a great job where I can do my kind of activist stuff and the protest stuff that I love doing as part of my work, which is great. And then just kind of, you know, see what happens.
But for those people like yourself that are waiting, you're now just waiting for that call, which is quite awkward.
It is. It's a funny space to be, but also like such a privileged place to be.
Yeah.
Hamilton needs a forward-thinking MP there. You've got to do something to stem the tide of the two that you got at the moment.
Yeah, Hamilton needs some Labour MPs for sure.
So what do you hope the government learn out of this, if anything? I doubt they will, though, if they learn anything.
Yeah, it's a hard question because I want them to lose the election. So part of me doesn't want them to learn anything because they need to lose the election. They need to be a one-term government so we can rewind all of these awful changes that they've made. But at the same time, I don't want them to keep making laws that disadvantage our people. So it's one of those two-edged swords where we can't take any more. People are already struggling under this government. You know, homelessness is going up. The amount of people really struggling with the cost of living is going up. Unemployment's going up. We don't want any more pain from this government. But at the same time, I really don't want to see them in again next time.
It's like what Thomas Portucker said the other day when they asked him about the homelessness numbers, and he had no idea.
Didn't he? Yeah. I think that's it, right? Like Tama's got in Kirikiriroa got people out of motels, so people living in transitional homes in motels. He's got them out of motels, but he hasn't got them into homes. He hasn't got them into permanent homes. And even though motels are not ideal, it's better to be in a motel than on the street. So that's kind of where the disconnect is with him. He'll come and say, you know, I've got less people out of transitional housing, but you haven't benefited them. There's more people on the street hungry than before.
Mm-hmm. This government actually does a really, really good sleight of hand in that they're really good at saying one thing and hiding the details of the other. Like, you know, we've got more people off the streets, and we saved, you know, $1 billion on the emergency housing budget. But, you know, homelessness has gone up and we're declining more of these sort of sanctions, and we don't tell you that part. What sort of resources do you think are out there or that you could recommend for people to look at or people to follow that might be able to help them see the bigger picture instead of just the lines that they're fed from the politicians?
Yeah, good. I'm going to say get out in the community and talk to the people who are giving community services. I was at the Salvation Army a couple of weeks ago and talking to some of the staff there about the pressure they are under to get funding, but also to feed and kind of create a nice space for people that are coming in from the streets. That's really where it hits home when you're talking to the people on the coalface about what it's really like. I think that gives people a really good understanding.
I guess that all ties into the social security amendment that went through the House this week too. That's so bad as well.
Yeah.
It's just been a crappy week in Parliament.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that I'm all out of questions, and you must be absolutely shattered after today. I mean, I'm barely keeping myself awake, and I was just there standing in the rain.
I'm quite hyped, actually. These things kind of hype me up, and then it takes me a while to. So that's fine. This is a good thing to do with my energy.
It helps you wind down a little bit. It's good.
Yeah.
If people want to learn more about or keep an eye on things like the next lot of strike actions, the
cool.
kind of public displays, where's the best places for them to go for that?
The CTU have got great resources. So there's a petition, pay equity petition happening. We're up to about 50,000 signatures. If you just Google that CTU pay equity petition, then you can add your name in and then choose to stay on the mailing list, and that will send you information about all of the CTU events that are happening. I think that's probably a great way to do it.
Fantastic. And any last messages about what happened today? Any sort of final thoughts on how it all went down?
Yeah, I was just thinking that we ended up not talking about pay equity. I talked about a lot of things that weren't pay equity. I'm sure I need to say some more things about pay equity. Huh?
Yeah. Well, as I say, in terms of pay equity, what are your thoughts around the whole thing?
Yeah. One of the things that I wanted to mention when I was thinking about before this was that, and this goes back to what we're talking about at the start about how it's a complete rewriting of the Act that's going to make it a lot harder for people to make claims and have successful claims, is that part of the Equal Pay Act was that there's a comparator between industries. So, for example, social workers or people working in care or education, they would compare those industries as a whole to other industries that were male dominated. So the police, people working in corrections, those kind of jobs would be the comparators. And that gave a good indication of where there was a pay gap, because female dominated care industries were paid a lot less than the equivalent in the male dominated. And that's part of the reason why the claims can be so tricky, because you've got to do a lot of work to make sure that the industries are really similar. So that's one of the things that's been scrapped, is that you can't compare two different industries. You can only compare one employer with another employer within the same industry, which essentially defeats the purpose because it is the whole care sector that is underpaid. It is everybody that's working in mental health services that is underpaid. You can't compare one employer to another and get any difference. And I think that's the key part of this, one of the key parts of this, which shows that this is just a complete rewriting of the Act, which means it's going to be impossible for us to actually settle and get pay equity across the board.
And it's interesting because you say about the carers, like, I rely on a lot of that myself, and, we've already heard of people questioning whether they can stay in the job because of the not sure about if they're going to get any rises or whatever. So time will tell, I suppose.
I mean, everyone in some capacity relies on carers. Our parents and our grandparents in retirement villages, we want the best care for our whānau, so we need to pay them what they're worth. Because, look, if we didn't have support workers, if we didn't have care workers, our society would not stand up.
Indeed.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to wrap this up on. Georgie, thank you so much for the work that you did today, the mahi putting on the protest, and then coming out and having a chat to us tonight. It's really appreciated.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me, Paul and Blake. Great to catch up.
You're very welcome. Bye-bye.
Ka
All right, fantastic.
Right.
See ya. So yeah, big turnout. It worked out, I believe it was a couple of thousand people around the country all up. So huge numbers, which is really good. After we have a chat to Professor Robert Patman, who's waiting in the green room, we'll show you the on the scene clip that we did today, of course, with Chloe and Ricardo. But we've got a guest waiting. We should bring him in because he is far more knowledgeable than I am on things like tariffs. And I want to learn just how much Donald Trump has screwed us over in the last 100 days. Professor Robert Patman, welcome.
Oh, good evening, Paul, and good evening, Blake.
How are you holding up?
Pretty good, thanks. Busy week and all that, but I'm sure it's the same for you guys.
Appreciate it.
We've been focusing on the protesting a lot around here, but but we're always happy to see you. Bring the light.
Thank you.
Bring the light when it comes to international relations.
I'd say we've just hit 100 days of Donald Trump. So how is everyone holding up?
Well, it depends who it is. I think the MAGA supporters been. I think they've got mixed feelings. I think the MAGA supporters really like the fact that Mr. Trump's been very active in his agenda to make America first. However, I think there's a few things they didn't bargain for. The US stock exchange has lost in excess of 11 trillion since Mr. Trump's been president. And of course, tariffs are a tax. So this cost of living for many Americans is going up, which is a cause of considerable concern. For those who didn't vote for Mr. Trump, I suppose their worst fears about Mr. Trump being in office have, to some extent, been realized. This is a much more radical second Trump administration than the first. The big difference, of course, is that Mr. Trump made it very clear from the word go he was going to pick people for senior positions on the basis of loyalty rather than proven competence. And that means that he's trying to do a lot, but he's got people who often don't have the track record to carry out his agenda. So it's almost the perfect storm in many respects. But yeah, I mean, he claimed his first major victory with a tentative agreement, a free trade agreement with the UK, although there seems to be lots of qualifications to that particular deal. Yeah, so I think it's very much a mixed picture, even for the MAGA people. For the non-MAGA people, I think it's been almost disastrous. If you look at the domestic situation in the US seems to be on the road to autocracy. Mr. Trump has shown little concern for the Constitution. He's been questioning the legitimacy of judges. He's been targeting the media that wants to ask him serious questions. All those things are worrying. You also heard about the deportations in which due process wasn't observed. And that's actually upset some Republicans as well as Democrats. On the foreign policy front, Mr. Trump seems to be pursuing almost an imperial policy with territorial claims against Canada, Greenland, or Denmark, liberal democracy. So he's targeted two liberal democracies. In addition, he at one stage proposed ownership of Gaza. He's backed off from that proposal, but he has doubled down on his support for Netanyahu's onslaught that's going on in Gaza. And in addition, he seems, at least initially, wanted to settle the Ukraine conflict on Mr. Putin's terms and seemed to make no distinction between the victim of aggression and the aggressor. And the aggressor is clearly Mr. Putin. And there was that appalling scene that I think you probably saw in the Oval Office where Mr. Zelensky was being told off in authoritarian fashion by the president and the vice president However, I have a feeling that Zelensky's outmaneuvered both Putin and Mr. Trump, and he showed that he's not only courageous, but he's a shrewd political leader. But yeah, it from a foreign policy standpoint, Mr. Trump's been much more radical, and of course, I haven't mentioned the tariffs really in the foreign policy front, but that's there are signs that the administration has backed off a bit. Initially, you recall on the 2nd of April, they imposed about 100, and I think they targeted 186 countries, including our own. The thing that disconcerted many people, even those sympathetic to Trump's economic aspirations, was the fact that Mr. Trump didn't seem to be on top of the facts. His administration, for example, falsely claimed that New Zealand placed 20% tariffs on American products when it's about 1.7%, and the Europeans had a similar experience. So that
Which
has
is,
hardly
to be fair, still more in tariffs than they get charged when they put them out to islands that are completely inhabited by penguins.
Sorry?
We still charge more tariffs to the US than those islands that are completely inhabited by penguins that they put tariffs onto.
Yes, but I suppose the point I was making, Paul, is that it didn't convey competence for someone who wrote a book called The Art of the Deal. It didn't, and it doesn't win much respect, and that's the problem. And the administration was forced to back off with what appeared to be almost a fire sale of US Treasury bonds, which supports the US deficit. So what we have at the moment is that only China is the biggest target for tariffs at the moment, and my understanding is the administration has put a 90-day pause on the other tariffs, but using a 10% tariff as a baseline for any discussions that occur between countries on a bilateral basis.
So Robert, we've seen a lot of leaning to the left in the most recent elections, the last couple of 6 weeks or so. So we saw Mr. Carney shocking and really surprisingly have a big win for the Canadians, Liberals, I think it was, and then the Conservatives got dumped out, including their leader. And then we saw a very similar pattern with Mr. Dunn and the Australians. So what's your opinion on this whole claim that there's a Trump effect turning the world left again? Because we've had back-to-back elections where both opposition leaders have been dumped out completely. They've not just lost the election, they've been completely dumped out of Parliament and had to go and find another job.
Yes, it's quite extraordinary, but I got some insight into what might happen in Canada. I was in Canada between the 3rd of January and the 10th. I gave a presentation in Waterloo University, which is about an hour and a half outside Toronto. And what really struck me, admittedly, I didn't meet with a wide representation of the Canadian public. I met people that you do when you're traveling, like in airports and queuing up for things, and where the hotel I stayed, the staff there. But the impression that really stayed with me was how furious Canadians across the political divide were. I remember queuing to catch the connection between Vancouver and Toronto, and I was standing next to a guy, and we got into conversations like you do when you're traveling, and he was telling me how he and his brother had never voted anything but Conservative throughout their whole life. They ran a small family business. They had no time for Mr. Trudeau, who was still Prime Minister at that time of Canada. But he said something that was really telling. He said he felt enormously offended when Mr. Trump described Trudeau as Governor Trudeau. He said, you just can't imagine what an insult that was. He said, we've often, as a country, supported the United States, even when we've disagreed with them. And he said there was a great sense of anger and betrayal, and that probably accounts for how the Conservative vote collapsed. And it was happening under Trudeau's leadership. Trudeau took a tough line. And there was a conversation just before he left office with Trump, 50-minute conversation. And what we know from White House sources is that Mr. Trump tried to do a deal with Mr. Trudeau, but Mr. Trudeau had none of it. He said, no, you imposed illegally a 25% tariff on us, and you're going to have to take it all away, not parts of it. And I think Mark Carney has very much read the room well, but the scene was already set for him. That's what I'm trying to say. And it made Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative leader, put him in a very difficult position, because a lot of his natural supporters were going to, I think, go for the candidate who appeared willing to stand up to Trump. And Mark Carney and Trudeau in his last month or so took on that mantle. And Mark Carney, the thing that's impressive about Carney is that he was a very successful governor of the Bank of England, and he knows all about populists because he dealt with the Brexiteers, and he wasn't impressed by them. And it was interesting to see his masterclass the other day when he dealt with Mr. Trump in the White House, when Mr. Trump restated his view that Canada should be the 51st state. He just simply coolly replied, there are some things not for sale. I understand the White House is not for sale. I've been consulting with the owners in Canada. That's not for sale either. And I thought it was quite a diplomatic but clever way of getting the point across to the president. Don't keep flogging this dead horse, if you to excuse an awful phrase, but don't keep, making this demand. And it seems to me that, Canada I suppose, had to be anti-Trump because it was being targeted. They were basically put in a ridiculous situation. And we are talking about a key member of the Five Eyes Alliance, by the way. I was a bit disappointed that New Zealand didn't speak up in defence of Canada. When I was there, one or two people said, it'll be nice if New Zealand spoke out. But we haven't spoken out in defence, although the EU did. With regard to Australia, I'm not sure Trump played quite such a strong role. After all, Australia was not targeted and in territorial terms by the United States. However, the Australians were furious with the 10% tariff that came their way, particularly since they have a free trade agreement with the United States. They probably thought they deserved, if you like, preferential treatment. But both Britain and Australia, both of whom consider, Australia, if anything, is the closest ally the United States has had in the post-45 period. I think Anthony Albanese captured the mood in Australia when he said this was an unfriendly act and we're going to have to rethink our relations with the United States. And I think the election was fought on that basis. Although it's interesting, some commentators in Australia say the Trump factor was not as big as in Canada because that Peter Dutton fought such a bad campaign. Many Australians, even sympathetic to his agenda, were not particularly excited by his performance. He lost the debates quite clearly to Albanese. And in a sense, Albanese probably had one of his better campaigns he's participated in. I think he was fired up, though, by what happened over the tariffs. And but it's true what Blake was saying, though. Both Poilievre in Canada and also Peter Dutton, they were both seen as pro-Trump figures before Mr. Trump started targeting Canada and then imposing the 10% tariff on Australia. And that probably did hurt them.
Because even in Australia, we saw that in the last week of the election, the tide starting to turn in Australia against Peter Dutton and the Liberals. So yeah, I'm curious, and we'll probably never know how much of an effect Trump's tariffs had on both of those elections. And I'm very interested to see if, because there's a few more elections to come in various parts of the world over the next wee while, whether that trend of Trump hanging over everybody continues and people tend to go the opposite way. And I'll be very interested to see how that comes into our election next year or whenever we have it.
Well, I think it's already had an impact in New Zealand. New Zealand clearly can't sign up to AUKUS now. This enhanced security agreement involving the UK, Australia, and the United States. At one time, both the Labour-led government and the National-led government have seriously looked into joining Pillar 2 of AUKUS. I think that's over. It would be a very dangerous and perhaps futile effort to sell joining an enhanced security alliance headed by Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump is not popular in New Zealand, and he may have his fans in the minor parties like ACT and New Zealand First, but amongst National, he's not. And what we're seeing is a clear difference of emphasis between Mr. Luxon, who wants to safeguard the free trade order and will certainly enter into discussions, whereas Mr. Peters, the foreign minister, he certainly expressed public reservations about Mr. Luxon talking to other Europeans, other leaders, and also Mr. Luxon's language about a trade war. But actually, Mr. Trump calls it a trade war. So there's there's a bit of a difference of emphasis opening up between National, who want to be proactive in safeguarding the free trade era, and some of the minor parties who share the anti-woke campaign or anti-woke agenda of the Trump administration. But of course, there's a big difference, isn't there, between a major party like National, which is hoping to get somewhere between 30 and 50% of the vote, and a minor party which is really aiming to get over the threshold. So they're really looking at different audiences. And National, a key constituency for National must be the farming sector. And, agricultural exports are the backbone of this country's economy. So that sector would be deeply affected if everyone caved in and gave in to US protectionism.
Just one more before I hand back to Paul. Because I worry about Pillar 2 not being dead, the opportunity not being dead, because I'm a bit suspicious as to why Miss Collins had now decided to spend all that money on ramping up our defence. Now, yes, it could be for it to help Ukraine, all of it, but it could be to get ready to look at stuff like Pillar 2 still. So she might still have it in the back of her mind. Would you rule that out as a possibility?
Well, I do know a lot of people believe and fear, a bit like yourself, that the hike in defence expenditure is due to Mr. Trump's pressure on Liberal Democratic allies to increase their commitment to defence. I don't think that's the case with New Zealand. The reason I don't think so is because Andrew Little, when he was Defence Minister, just before the last election in September 2023, actually envisaged defence expenditure rising to about 2% within the term of the next Labour government. So I don't think this is a partisan response by a centre-right coalition in response to Trump. I think actually it's your reverse. I think New Zealand has worked out that it has a conflict of interest with the United States, and it can't rely on the United States in the way that it could in the past. And given that reality, I mean, New Zealand's been able to keep its defence expenditure to about 1% of GDP. Suddenly, we have a leader in the White House who is backing a leader that has invaded a country, a liberal democratic country, Ukraine. And that is a bit of a wake-up call. And I think it's accelerated a process that's already in the works. I think New Zealand has key interest it wants to defend and protect. It doesn't mean we're going to act unilaterally, but it does mean if we're called to contribute to multilateral security operations, we can bring more to the table. Mr. Peters made this point, I think, quite well. He said wherever he goes, particularly in the liberal democratic world, he's faced tough questions about the low level of New Zealand's commitment to defence. If you want to uphold an international rules-based order, New Zealand does, you sometimes have to put your hand in your pocket to do it. And it does. It's not effortless. And I do also think I think the defence expenditure is not pitched at the United States as per se. I think it's designed to smooth relations with Australia, but also to mean that we can contribute to wider international issues. Many of the security problems we face do require international solutions. And if we're going to contribute to that, we do need to have something to contribute. And I think there's a feeling that that's what I think. And so I don't think Blake, it's because we're taking orders from Washington. I think it's a recognition that New Zealand is facing more security challenges before, and it can't rely on the United States to resolve those challenges. And it needs to have greater capabilities now to deal with these challenges.
Do you think that decision to increase that capability has been moved forward a little bit because of what happened with those Chinese ships in the Tasman Sea?
It possibly could. But as I say, it was in the works. And the much vaunted defence development or defence capability plan, that certainly was in the works before the incident with China. But China is, you see, something's really important to establish here is that New Zealand, as a relatively small country, and most small countries, in fact, all small countries, and most middle powers, they all rely on something called an international rules-based order. That is, they rely on international institutions and processes to ensure that business internationally is conducted through rules and principles, not raw power. We now have a president who has a top-down view of international relations and believes that great powers run the world. He's got no time for international institutions or international law. And that is a real challenge to us. We trade with more than 100 countries around the world, and this country's prosperity depends, and its security, on a rules-based international order. So how does China fit into it? China is challenging the rules-based international order. It's become more assertive. This is not new. The Ardern government produced a defense statement in 2018 that identified China as a potential threat to the rules-based order. So we don't have any illusions about China. It's a dictatorship. It's a one-party state. It's very different from the political values that most Kiwis have. At the same time, the Trump administration has emerged as a threat to the rules-based order. So we have multiple threats now to the rules-based order. And so we have Russia invading Ukraine, China becoming more assertive, and we have a president whose activities so far seem to be backing the aggressor in Ukraine, and that could embolden China. So we need, I agree, activities by China could in near the Pacific Island nation region, which we take, which is, it's our core strategic value. We've got close people-to-people relations with the Pacific Island nations. Yeah, I think it's part of the mix, definitely. I don't think it's the only factor.
So we kind of rock hard place New Zealand in the middle.
Well, I don't think most Kiwis share we do not want to be a pawn between the United States and China. We don't see our future as being a mini China or a mini US. But if we're going to protect an independent foreign policy, we do need the wherewithal to do that. It doesn't come cost free. Otherwise, if you don't increase your defense capabilities, there could become a dangerous gap between what you stand for, an independent foreign policy, and your ability to deliver on that front. And that I think the government is responding to close that credibility gap.
I've got one last question for you. It's a slightly 90 degrees from where we've been question. The United States obviously has a very different, they've had a bit of a shift in the way that they look at the world from an ideological perspective with the new president. A large part of the supporter base that we see for the president are using things like culture war talking points, anti-trans bathroom bills and that kind of stuff that we're seeing mirrored by at least one of our political parties, by our foreign affairs minister. I'm kind of curious, is there an impact on our reputation when it comes to the rest of the world when somebody like our foreign affairs minister, who to be fair does seem quite good at compartmentalizing when he's overseas, how he's going to represent himself, but is there an impact internationally on our reputation or how we work with other countries when, Winston Peters is sitting there going, I need to check what's in your pants before you go into the bathroom?
Well, I think it's regrettable that the foreign minister, who has a very big job to do in international affairs, is getting involved in the private lives of people. I mean, it seems to me it's regrettable that not just politicians in this country, it's regrettable in the United States and elsewhere, that people are trying to turn the clock back and deny that, how should I put it, there is diversity in sexual orientation. I don't know why people get so animated about this when we've got such huge problems like inequality, climate change, security issues. It seems to me, this is minutiae compared with the big issues, and that's unfortunate. And I do think it's unfortunate. I'm not sure. I do agree that Mr. Peters, he I know he's got to wear, he's leader of New Zealand First, and he's got to wear that hat, and he's got to try to get his party over the threshold, the 5% threshold. At the same time, though, he has been Deputy Prime Minister, and when he makes statements as such as he has, there is a risk it will be seen internationally, and people may draw conclusions. But that's coalition politics, I guess. Mr. Luxon probably would, I don't know, but he would probably prefer that Mr. Peters doesn't make those noises. But he has no choice but to bite his lip and go along with it. And I think it's, if you like, a function of coalition politics. I'm just disappointed when there's such big issues, genuine challenges. How can we make the economy work for more people in this country and indeed internationally? That we're getting bogged down with things like, whether insisting that all bathrooms have to have a binary labels and things like that. I think that I don't think it will work, by the way. I think young people will not accept it. And it's all very well governments pronouncing from a high about how people should be. But that is not necessarily the same as how people are. There's always a difference, Paul, between declaratory policy and substantive policy. I can claim I want to run 15 kilometers every day, but can I? Well, probably not. And
I know that feeling very well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's unfortunate. I also think it's unfortunate that Democratic politicians keep targeting the media. And the media plays a very important role in a democracy of keeping politicians accountable. If politicians keep complaining about the media, it worries me, because as Harry Truman, the US president, once said, democratic politicians, he used the analogy of a kitchen. If you go into a kitchen, don't complain if it's hot. If you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen. Don't become a professional politician in a democracy if you don't like the questions you're being asked. You're paid to answer questions, and the electorate expect you to answer questions and ask searching questions, expect you to receive searching questions. So that's a disappointing trend I've seen a bit recently, not just in New Zealand, but internationally. And I think that a vibrant democracy needs a strong media. It needs strong media outlets. Diverse. I mean, just like this, like your platform. But it's important. If you've got strong and diverse sources of media and outlets, I think it adds up to the richness of the society.
Do you think that the reason why Mr. Peters is, using the rainbow community as a bit of an attack wheel is because he's trying to impress Mr. Trump, because he wants to do something very similar to him to try and impress Mr. Trump, because Mr. Trump is doing it. So let's do it to try and get a good trade deal in the future because we're on the same wavelength sort of thing? Or do you think it's a complete coincidence?
I don't think we're going to get a trade deal with the United States in the near future. We've been trying since the late 80s, and it was China that gave us a free trade agreement. It wasn't the United States. And when the United States had the chance to participate in a multilateral free trade agreement, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, guess who pulled out? It was the United States that pulled out of that under Mr. Trump. So we, despite our best efforts over many years, have not been able to close a free trade agreement with the US. I don't think using anti-woke language is going to convert the White House. The White House is completely non-sentimental about economic affairs. I'm deeply amused by Mr. Trump's continued refrain that everyone is ripping off the United States. But if they are ripping off the United States, if the rest of the world has ripped off the United States, all I can say is the rest of the world has done an extraordinarily incompetent job, because the United States remains a head and shoulders superpower. You only have to look at the top 50 corporations of the world. About 40 of them are US. So I don't think there's been too much ripping off, except in Mr. Trump's mind. And I don't think, how would America look at a free trade agreement with the United States? Well, first of all, New Zealand is a relatively small market. So while the US has emerged as a major trade destination for our exports and very important to us, no doubt about that, China and the US are our two biggest markets at the moment. But we are not the US's biggest market for its exports. We're about 55th. So it's a bit of a, when it comes to trade importance, it's a bit of a one-way street, actually. Very important to us, but not quite so important to the US. So, of course, the US wants good relations to New Zealand, and we want good relations with them. But I think it comes down to the fact there's been this difference of view, Blake, in the government between those, well, not within the government. The government actually takes the view that we should basically keep our head down, try to not appear on the radar of Mr. Trump, and we might not be a target. But the danger of that is that Mr. Trump doesn't hold back from doing things that undermine our interests. In other words, our restraint doesn't actually produce any restraint on his behalf. He still slapped a 10% tariff against us, although New Zealand has possibly the most open economy in the world. And, constantly praised by the IMF and the World Bank for one of the best places to do business in. So I'm not sure. The other thing is our restraint has meant we've arguably let down those who need our support. Have we spoken out enough about those suffering in Gaza? Have we defended Denmark? Have we publicly expressed support for Canada? I think, there are costs about keeping your head down, particularly when it's not actually preventing your interests being undermined.
Do you think Mr. Luxon's making a mistake being so quiet then? Just before you go on that.
Well, I think many countries are trying to be constructive with the United States, but I think some are losing patience. I think Canada has definitely made it clear its future is not with the United States. And they are building up trade with the EU and China rapidly, and with New Zealand. We're selling more and more to Canada now to fill the void left by the rupture in relations between the US and Canada. I do think that you asked me earlier about, Canada and Australia. I think that may stiffen resolve, those two results, amongst those people who are saying, look, Mr. Trump's taking steps which are undermining us. We actually depend on a free trade order. There's been speculation that the members of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, there's 11, 12 now, Britain's now joined it, those countries may see their very rigorous free trade, multilateral free trade agreement as a model to bring in other countries. A number of European countries would like that arrangement, and the WTO has been paralyzed by the World Trade Organization, has been paralyzed in recent years by the first Trump administration, and then the Biden administration, and the second Trump administration has no time for the WTO. So we are looking, I think the government is quietly looking at alternative free trade arrangements. Now, the danger here for Mr. Trump is that his tariffs could isolate the United States in the medium term, not in the short term. And, China, although it's facing a lot of tariffs, is quietly encouraging other countries not to give in. It's also warned them, this was quite blunt, China has also warned countries trying to negotiate with the White House, it's your sovereign right to do that, but don't do anything to disturb your economic relationship with us in Beijing, which is a way of saying, don't you go and do a deal which America, don't negotiate in a way which will harm Chinese interests. And, China is in a relatively strong position because it's responsible for 31% of all manufacturing in the world. And a lot of us depend on Chinese products. So it's an interest. We're in a bit of a fork in the road moment. I was very interested in a comment recently, mid-April actually, given by the EU chief, Ursula von der Leyen. And she said, the West as we know it is over. And that seems to assume there's going to be a major divide between Europe and the United States. It's not if, but when, really. And that seems to be the feeling now. I think, so we've kept our head down, like many countries, hoping that Mr. Trump will have a reassessment or he'll return to the status quo. There doesn't seem to be too much sign of that happening yet. But at some point, I think New Zealand will not be able to sit on the fence for too long. It will probably have to choose between entering some sort of bilateral or US headed arrangement preferential trade, or going towards the Europeans and the Chinese and upholding a free trade system. So the Chinese are about to sign a major free trade deal with EU. So that's got implications for New Zealand, of course, because we've got a free trade agreement with both.
Fun times ahead.
Yeah, well, thank you for joining us tonight, Robert. As always,
you're very welcome.
It's I always feel like I'm in a university lecture whenever we speak with you. So.
No, it's brilliant. Always brilliant. So thank you very much, Robert. It's very much appreciated.
Pleasure. You guys have a good weekend.
See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you very much. All the best.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Always learn so much when we have a chat to Robert, and so I don't know how he does it, because there's so much going on around the world to actually be able to keep in your mind how everything connects and interacts. It blows my mind.
I hope by the way, I'm just going to point out, I hope my screen doesn't go blank when you play the next two videos, because I couldn't see the graphic with the chart on it. It was a graphic with when you brought Robert in, so hopefully I don't sit with him.
That's all right. We should jump into the next two videos, because it's going to take about 15 minutes to get through them both, and there's only 20 minutes left until BHN starts, and I know we will lose all of our audience at 9 o'clock because BHN is on. So I'm going to jump on first with a new segment that I don't know how often I'm going to be rolling it out when I actually go to news locations and do like actual news stuff. Fun game for everybody watching. I want you to see how many of your favorite left-leaning content creators you can spot in this video, because there is at least two that are in this video who are known particularly for their writing side of things. We'll see if people can pick up on that one. Three days to organise protests up and down the Mutu is a hell of a feat, and to actually manage to pull it off is, well, it just goes to show you how passionate people are about the issues that are on hand at the moment. And what we've seen today is thousands of people braving the wet weather and the traffic and everything else that could be thrown at them in the middle of a workday to get out there and make their voices heard about how angry they are when it comes to law changes that the government snuck through under urgency that blindsided parts of the House in an effort to save $17 billion at the expense of women in our workforce. So I went along to the protest today in Tamaki Makaurau and managed to sit down and have a bit of a quick chat with the Green Party's Chloe Schwarbrick and Ricardo Menendez-March. So let's jump over there and see what they have to say about this. First question, how do you think turnout went today?
I think that this is a phenomenal turnout. We had people as far as the eye could possibly see on an incredibly rainy day, on a working day, but you can see the different feeling and anger in the community.
How do you think the message is going to be received by the other half of the House?
Mate, I think that this is going to be an experience exactly like when they came for Te Tiriti o Waitangi. And what they saw is, instead of the division that they were trying to stoke among our communities, is that the country stood more unified than ever before on the values of justice, understanding and honouring our history, and moving forward together. I think that they have grossly miscalculated what it means to come after the lowest paid women in our society, and the fact that New Zealanders will stand up and fight back.
Your thoughts, Ricardo?
I think this just showed that this is a government for the wealthy few and not workers, particularly women workers who are in some of the lowest paid jobs. One of the ways that we can change this is by making this a one-term government, so people can actually voice their views with their vote in the upcoming election and make sure that these changes don't last.
I heard the line, the next election starts Tuesday. Fantastic line. Where can people go to find out what's going on and to keep them in the loop with this stuff?
I think one of the most important things for everybody who has been flooding into our comments and our emails and through correspondence asking what the hell do we do to fight back against this, the most important thing that you can possibly do is to turn up. Turn up to the rallies, turn up to the protests, look around you and see the power that we have in our numbers. The hundreds of people here today outnumbered the 123 members of parliament at several to one. And if we keep that energy going, if regular people decide to get together, we don't need to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. If we are moving forward together and having these conversations with our whānau, with our co-workers, with those who we're studying with, and ensuring that we're all aware of where we want to be moving forward to, then these guys won't get away with distracting and dividing us.
Last question, where can people find more information about joining and fighting?
Go to your relevant union page. So, for example, today I found out of this event by the PSA's Instagram page. But equally, you can keep an eye on what we as MPs are doing, and hopefully that'll give you more information about how you can just get involved, not just in the fight against the changes that the government has made this week, but a fight for an economy that works for all of us.
Join your union.
Is that going to work? Oh. I don't know what happened there. Took us off stage for a second. It was very strange.
Yeah.
It's just not working for me. I've had a couple of people pop up, and I want to thank everybody who I bumped into today who came up and said hi. It was absolutely lovely meeting everybody. Even in the rain, it was so good to see people getting out there and getting really worked up about it and wanting to see some change. When we recorded that interview, we pulled the two MPs to the side and put them under an awning, and I'm standing literally just on the other side of the awning, soaked, absolutely saturated, but totally worth it. Totally worth it. And then because it was lots of traffic out and about, we hit the school run. The storm came in and hit the city. It was a nice long drive home, so the heater was blasting, and I managed to drip dry most of the way here.
That was cool. Now, are we mentioning where that other interview was supposed to be on the show, where it's going to be?
I have not had a chance to cut up a trailer, but on Sunday afternoon, we'll have Professor Sean Hendy. We'll have an interview with him where he'll turn around and tell us why mandates didn't work and why he thought that they were a bad idea when it came to vaccines, the chief science advisor. So that will be Sunday.
It was
supposed to do
it was supposed to be here, but we had to bump it because of the stupid
juggle with everything that was on. Right. Should we do the news?
Yeah.
All right. Mission to be treated like shit. School leavers fleeing the country where the Prime Minister thinks banning social media is a fix to all society's problems. Sunk costs to keep sinking ferry project from going under. And the Wellington Airport says, "Fly you fools," to iconic artwork. All that and more on this week's The News. Hello there, kia ora. I'm Paul, and yeah, I know. Leading tonight's news, protest action all over the country happened today outside MP offices up and down the Mutu as the government repeals pay equity laws. On Tuesday, Brooke Van Velden, seen here looking for John Connor, Minister of Workplace Relations and second fiddle to the party that claims that they're all about equal treatment and rights for all, tabled a bill that would repeal the legal protections to ensure women were paid equal to men for comparable work across industries and cancelled 33 claims currently being processed from mostly government departments. According to economist Bernard Hickey, these changes and the changes to the threshold for reapplying will net the government an extra $17 billion over 4 years from industries like teaching, carers and nurses, which is only just more than the $14.5 billion tax cuts cost us last year in the budget, which disproportionately benefited the wealthy. Said Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters, seen here thinking no one else heard that really loud fart, "We support this because it will stop people asking what is a woman. We've clearly defined it as someone who earns less than a man, and now no one will want to transition knowing that they'll have to take a pay cut." An Education Ministry report on Monday showed a record number of high-achieving teens have chosen to move overseas after finishing secondary school. The report shows 10% of the highest-achieving NCEA result achievers left the country once their study was finished in 2023. While the ministry hasn't looked into the reasons specifically why the moves are happening, it mirrors other trends of New Zealanders moving overseas and is more likely to occur with students from high socio-economic areas. According to the always balanced and never racist or misleading Hobson's Pledge, it's because students overseas don't have to deal with the Māorification of education, while students overseas claim it's because they're sick of racist old assholes trying to run the country. Education Minister Erica Stanford, seen here showing reporters her Macarena, along with Chris Bishop and Nicola Willis, have been caught using personal accounts for their ministerial emails, raising questions about the security of important data and why printers don't like their work email. Unlike secure government email, Google doesn't use end-to-end encryption, and users often have to unwittingly agree to allow Google full access to content and allow emails to help train AI models. This move has frustrated conservatives since they've been trying for over a decade to find a way to bring in the US culture war line, but what about her emails? But they never expected it to be one of their MPs to cause the problem. Said the Prime Minister, seen here meeting Queensland's latest police recruits before they fly out. Look, what I'm saying to you is, yes, we would have been calling for her to be fired if she was a Labour MP, but clearly we can't do that here. What with multiple of my MPs doing this, that would just be rude. A new poll from the Taxpayer Union, which also has links to other astroturfing groups, the Free Speech Union and the Sensible Sentencing Trust, has released its latest Curia poll, a polling company known to ask misleading questions, which have led to claims of creating bias in their responses on multiple occasions and their resignation from the polling governing body, the Research Association of New Zealand. Said a spokesperson for mainstream media, of course we're not going to mention that bit when we promote the poll results showing an outcome for the centre-right parties we like, or how it came out the day after the government alienated half the population for being a woman, but the poll was done before all this happened. New data released from Elections NZ show the National Party took in almost $5 million in donations last year, nearly 3 times the amount of the nearest other parties. Under electoral law, every party must file annual returns on donations. National's highest donors included the man behind the Sistema storage empire, the man behind real estate company Barfoot and Thompson, the Canterbury Nationalists Trust, which you shouldn't Google because the words Canterbury and Nationalists end up with frankly way too many results that are going to put you on a watch list, and $350,000 from Nelson's Robert Wares. Said a spokesperson for the National Party, we are always happy to see donors like these people support what we do. And we know some of these numbers are shockingly high, but we can assure you that won't be the case next year. Since Robert died in March, we're very sorry to see his wallet go. The National Party announced short-lived plans to ban children from social media this week. The move being framed as protecting children from the harms of social media, like the Prime Minister's TikTok account, and has nothing to do with how young people on the platform would spam his accounts with common sense questions a lot of their parents didn't ask before the election. The bill, however, failed after ACT voted against it, preferring instead to put it through the Select Committee stage. Said a spokesperson for ACT, we are never keen to limit the ways in which ACT party leaders can communicate with minors through apps like Facebook and Snapchat. 3 News has revealed that documents out of the office of Mental Health Minister Matt Ducey, seen here showing he couldn't have done it because he has nothing in his hand, show public-facing reports had been changed to minimise the number of workers the mental health sector needs to ensure delivery of services. The report shows someone in Ducey's office specifically requested the removal of the admission and other fields which highlight the extreme shortfall in staffing levels after feedback from Health Commissioner Lester Levy, while Ducey claims it was not a direct request from him. Said Ducey, look, over there, it's Jason Momoa, before running away and hiding under his desk. Despite overwhelming opposition and public feedback, the government is set to progress with the ACT Party's Regulatory Standards Bill after Cabinet signed off on it. And in a callback to last week's This Week's The News, it seems like it will be introduced before the Waitangi Tribunal can proceed too far into its urgent claim investigation. All 76 supporters of the bill, which includes the Atlas-linked New Zealand initiative, claim it's about good lawmaking, and the other 23,000 submitters pointed out that this bill puts wealth and property rights, often overriding te tiriti in the process, as its primary goal. Said Seymour of the process, seen here on a panel called Reasons ACT Members Shouldn't Have Social Media for Themselves, this law doesn't stop politicians from making bad rules, and to prove it, we're going to see how many bad laws we can make before being voted out at the election in December. The government this week announced an amendment to the Wildlife Act to be passed under urgency that would allow the killing of native animals, including the kiwi, bats and lizards, to happen to allow the building of roads and other infrastructure. After a court case found that the Wildlife Act did not create the ability for the Department of Conservation to issue exemptions from prosecution over accidental death of native wildlife, the government quickly worked to change the laws to re-enable it to happen. Said Environment Minister Tama Potaka, seen here listening to Simeon Brown try to pronounce Te Reo Māori, the best way to protect the scaly and slimy little creatures is to vote us back in at the next election. Kiwi Rail this week revealed that over $500 million had been spent on the cancelled IREX ferry projects to date, with more costs to come. It is unknown still what the cost of the break fee is going to be for the government cancelling the previous contract by text message days after getting into power to pay for their landlord tax changes, the ongoing costs to maintain the depleted and aging current ferry fleet, or the actual costs for smaller replacement ferries that won't be delivered until the end of the decade, instead of the end of the year as originally scheduled. But Rail Minister Winston Peters, seen here looking at what's on the top shelf, was unrepentant, saying, "Just because I'm the minister who was in charge under both governments dealing with this issue does not mean I should take any responsibility at all." The government has admitted to reimbursing about $20,000 in travel costs to Donald Trump's former Deputy Chief of Staff to show up in Auckland and say things like, "You can do it," from the audience of their recent infrastructure showcase. Chris Liddell, seen here with a very stable genius who told people to drink bleach to cure a virus, was recognised as the one person in the first Trump administration who actually worked for a peaceful transfer of power after the January 6th insurrection. He also gave a presentation that the National Party offered to help him on, that the Prime Minister called, quote, "a very thoughtful, a very considered presentation." When asked why the government paid for his flight costs, infrastructure spokesperson Chris Bishop said, "Well, we were going to offer him a citizenship like we did with Peter Thiel, but it turns out he was born in Matamata, so we had to find something else." The Catholic Church has selected its new leader in the fastest conclave of the 21st century. Pope Leo XV, seen here as Cardinal Prevost, was introduced to the world in the early hours of the morning New Zealand time and seen by many Catholics as a liberal along the lines of his predecessor. The secretive conclave can usually take days and in one instance took almost 3 years, but the process, which uses a voting system known as first past the popes, took less than 24 hours. It's understood the conclave went with a native English speaker to save time on translations, as they expect most of his prominent work is going to be to denounce everything Donald Trump does and tell the Vice President to stay away from him. Last Sunday was Star Wars Day, which led to some rather embarrassing social media moments from the worst people on the internet. President Donald Trump posted this on his Truth social media account, claiming to be stopping the Sith, a group of space fascists who silence those they don't agree with, work in the shadows to manipulate the population, control media narratives, and wield red lightsabers. While New Zealand's own ACT Party tried to claim changes on the RMA will make it easier to build big projects, like the Death Star, said David Seymour. Good, let the hate flow through you. That's been our overarching philosophy for making policy for over a decade now. And finally, in the words of Pippin Took, the Eagles are coming to an end at Wellington Airport. Officials announced earlier this week the tenure of the Eagles over the food court of 12 years was about to end, like it's the third age of Middle-earth and the king is about to return. The future of the iconic birds from Lord of the Rings is currently uncertain, but they will be put in storage until a decision is made, while Weta Workshop has something more Wellington-specific to put on display later this year as part of the renovations for the building. Personally, I think the airport should go all in on the Lord of the Rings thing. You know, custom signs that say, "You shall not pass here without removing fresh fruit and vegetables," or signs and security checks that say, "You can keep your secrets." No, you can't. You know, you can't keep it secret and keep us safe. Or even just an entry sign to the airport that says, "I'm going on an adventure." Because "Fly, you fools" is the kind of slogan that would be picked by a former CEO of Air New Zealand who happens to now be Prime Minister. Anyway, that's this week's The News. Have a fantastic time, live long, prosper, and we'll catch you all next week. Done. Easy. News, interviews, all sorts of fun and games. I think it's time to sign off so that everybody can go and get a quick drink and go to the bathroom before the next show.
Yes, and we will be back next week, I think.
Maybe. We'll see if I survive this week. I got a busy couple of days ahead of me.
We'll see you next time anyway.
Yes. Catch you later, everyone. Have a great night.
Bye-bye.